I would like to say in the beginning that much of the information in this particular presentation I've gleaned from a PowerPoint series by Lighted Way Ministries about the 70-week prophecy of Daniel 9 in 3 levels, from Michael Root's presentation, from a book by Danette Davis called His Sign, 3 Days and 3 Nights, and some research that I have done by myself. This is part 10 of a series of power presentations called Ye Shall Know the Truth, according to John 8:32, and the truth shall make you free. And the question is, free from what? Free from organized man-made religion and the doctrines and commandments of men. Don't forget, the fact that we believe something to be true does not make it true. Truth is truth whether we believe it or not. Truth stands on its own. It does not change if I or someone else believes it or not. Remember also, the truth is the original, and what is not the original is a counterfeit. Therefore, we want and need the original. Anything else will not do. So today's presentation is about the crucifixion and the resurrection of Yeshua, the Messiah. The search of the scriptures on this topic is important, not because it may affect salvation, but because it answers the questions posed on whether Yeshua kept his word and whether his word is true in this matter or not. However, all of the evidence, after it has been presented, people still can believe whatever they choose to believe. We do have that choice. Like Benjamin Franklin once stated, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. The question of our presentation is, was Yeshua crucified on a Wednesday, on a Thursday, or on a Friday? Does it really matter? Was Yeshua resurrected on a Sunday or on a Sabbath? What is fact and what is fiction? Do we know? There are actually 3 points of view. First, we have the Friday crucifixion, early Sunday morning resurrection. Number 1, Yeshua died on Friday, is what they say according to Mark 15:42, because it says it was a preparation day. Number 2, the third day, Matthew 16:21, requirement is met if the days are counted inclusively. The 3-night specification is not met. Thursday crucifixion, early Sunday morning resurrection. Number 1, it fits the third day requirement if the days are counted exclusively. Thursday is counted through Saturday night. Number 2, it makes Friday a Sabbath, putting 2 Sabbaths together. And then we have the Wednesday crucifixion, Sabbath, sundown, resurrection. Number 1, it fulfills the 3 days and nights in the heart of the earth, Matthew 12:40. Number 2, it fits the after 3 days, Matthew 27:63, if this expression is referring to 24-hour periods. Number 3, it allows for the purchase and preparation of spices between 2 holy Sabbath days, Mark 16:1 and Luke 23:27. And number 4, it coincides with the midst of the week, Daniel 9:27, when sacrifices and oblations would cease if this phrase has a literal application. Only one can be right. The Christian Church as a whole has traditionally spoken of Good Friday as a day on the Messiah was crucified and buried, with the resurrection taking place on the following Sunday. Several alternate views have been voiced as to which day of the week the crucifixion really took place. Millions of professing Christians gather for Easter sunrise services every year. Even many who rarely go to church at any other time will attend worship services at the church of their choice on Easter Sunday. But did you know that the Good Friday or Easter resurrection is a tradition? Because the Bible nowhere makes a claim that the true Messiah rose from the dead on Sunday morning. That is tradition. So where did the tradition of Good Friday start? Is that a good question? For the first 3 centuries, Christians did not celebrate the death of Messiah on a Friday. They did not even celebrate the resurrection on a Sunday. They celebrated the day of the resurrection based on the Passover on the 14th day of the first Jewish month. Thus the resurrection day would fall on different days, depending on the day of the Passover. It wasn't until the Emperor Constantine fixed the day of Easter on Sunday after the first full moon of spring, which corresponded to the Passover. After setting Easter on Sunday, the church leaders made an honest mistake by assuming the death of Messiah was on a Friday. They came to that conclusion based on the fact that Yeshua died before the weekly Sabbath, Saturday. Mark 15:42 confirms that Yeshua died the day prior to a Sabbath. It was preparation day, that is, the day before a Sabbath. The sign of Yeshua's messiahship. There were many proofs that Yeshua of Nazareth was a Messiah promised in the Old Testament. When we look at Matthew 11:2-6, it says the blind received their sight, the lame walked, the lepers were cleansed, the deaf heard, the dead were raised, and the poor received the gospel. John's Gospel records that Yeshua performed a number of remarkable signs, beginning with the marriage feast at Cana, where he turned water into wine, according to John 2:11. Notice why he performed these miracles. It states, "And truly Yeshua did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these were written that you may believe that Yeshua is the Messiah, the Son of Elohim, and that believing you may have life in his name." John 20:30-31. Yeshua's disciples witnessed these signs, which confirmed their faith that he was, indeed, the promised Messiah. From the very beginning of Yeshua's public ministry, the religious leaders were aware of his message and the signs that confirmed his authority. They knew that he was a Messiah. However, they still came to him several times to demand a sign that would establish once and for all that he truly was the Messiah. On each of these occasions, Yeshua told them that only one such sign would be given to them. John records in 27 of the Common Era, when Yeshua cleansed the temple by chasing out the money changers in John 2:19-21, he said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. But he was speaking of what? He was speaking of the temple of his body. Matthew records a similar exchange. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees answered, saying, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." But he answered and said to them, "An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah." Only one sign. How many? Only one sign. And that's recorded in Matthew 12:38-40. "For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Note that Yeshua was referring to Hebrew usage, not Greek. He specifically connected his stay in the tomb with that of Jonah in the fish's belly. It states in Jonah 1:17, "Now Yahweh had prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. First, what about the term heart of the earth? What does that mean? Where is the heart of the earth? Many people say in the heart of the earth is merely the region, not literally in the grave. Some say heart of the earth is not the grave, but the city of Jerusalem. Some say heart of the earth is one's emotions. Let's look at the Bible definitions. Mark 11:11, day 1. He entered the city, looked over the temple, and went to Bethany. Mark 11:12-13, day 2. He cleansed the temple and went to Bethany. Mark 11:20, day 3. He returned to Jerusalem and remained until his death. Mark 14:1, we have days 4 and 5, and day 6, the cross. Yeshua was physically in the vicinity of Jerusalem much longer than just 3 days. The heart of the earth. Matthew 12:40, heart. That's the word number 2588 from the lexicon Cardia. It says the heart can be the intention, affection, desire. It can also mean the middle or inner part, as the heart is in relation to the breast, Matthew 12:40. As the heart of the earth is the inner part of the earth, meaning the grave. Understanding Hebrew idioms. Yeshua was comparing himself and the situation to Jonah's in every sense. The heart of the earth and the whale's belly were Hebrew idioms known to have represented Leviathan, or figuratively the grave and death, because it was associated with the word yam, the sea or the abyss. The Encyclopedia of Jewish Symbols states, these sea monsters have many names: Tanim, dragon; Rahaf, expanse; and Yam, sea, but the most common name is Leviathan. In the book of Revelation, Leviathan is called Abaddon, the king of destruction or corruption, who comes up from the abyss or sea. Abaddon is a beast of the sea, that old serpent, whose abode is an expanse, literally meaning the grave. You can read that under a website called earlychristianwritings.com. But what about the expression 3 days and 3 nights? The same expression was used when Queen Esther told her cousin Mordecai, go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan, and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. Esther 4:16. Each of these accounts was clearly describing a period of 72 hours, 3 days and 3 nights. This is exactly what Yeshua meant, and the Pharisees knew it. Notice how they quoted his statement to Pilate, the Roman governor. They said, sir, we remember while he was still alive, how that deceiver said, after 3 days I will rise. See Matthew 27:63. They knew that Yeshua was not talking about a mere day and a half, but rather indicating 3 full days. Consider what is at stake in Yeshua's statement in Matthew 12:39-40. He places his entire identity on the line with his sign. If he failed his own design, then he's not our Savior, and nothing he said can be trusted. If his prophecy of this sign failed, then he must be considered a false prophet. Satan wants to deny that Yeshua was the Messiah. For that reason, he would seek to relegate the story of Jonah and the whale to folklore, myth, symbolism, and superstition. If this miracle of 3 days and 3 nights never occurred, then Yeshua's sign based entirely upon it is nothing more than hollow and pointless allegory. Yeshua's body had to be miraculously preserved. Psalm 16:10 states, "For thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption." It takes 6 hours after death before a body will show corruption. So Christ's body had to be miraculously preserved. After 2 days, Hosea 6:1-3, "Come, let us return to the Lord, to Yahweh, for he has torn us, but he will heal us. He has wounded us, but he will bandage us. He will revive us after 2 days. He will raise us up on the 3rd day, that we may live before him." Hosea 13:14, "I will ransom them from the power of Sheol, the pit of corruption. I will redeem from death. O death, where are your thorns? O Sheol, where is your sting?" Death in any face is a pit of corruption. Yeshua is our Messiah. He did fulfill the only sign given, the 3-day and 3-night prophecy. It is only misunderstandings and tradition of men that have caused us to believe otherwise. The question is now, when was the crucifixion? Many will say, doesn't the Bible say that Yeshua was crucified and buried on a Friday, and that the tomb was empty on Sunday morning? That is correct. The tomb was already empty on Sunday morning. But the Bible nowhere speaks of a Friday crucifixion. It does say that he was crucified on the preparation day. See Mark 15:42-45. But we must recognize which preparation day this was. Remember, the Bible speaks of annual Sabbath days or holy days in addition to the weekly Sabbath. See Leviticus 23:4, verse 7, verse 24, and verses 27-32. Yeshua was crucified on the preparation day before an annual Sabbath. During the daily portion of the Passover on Abib 14 on the Hebrew calendar. The following day, Abib 15, is an annual holy day, the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. This data here was obtained from U.S. Naval Observatory Astronomical Applications Department. In presentation number 9, when we considered the public life of Yeshua, we learned that he died in the year of 28 of the Common Era. Okay? So we have here the Passover dates between 26 and 34 of the Common Era. And we see that in the year 28 of the Common Era, the 14th day of Nisan, which is Passover, fell on a Wednesday, April 28. And Passover, in this year, 28 Common Era, the year of Yeshua's crucifixion. And you will remember that from our previous presentation number 9. Thursday was an annual Sabbath, the first holy day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. He was buried just before sunset on Wednesday afternoon and was in the tomb Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday. 3 days and 3 nights, exactly just as he has promised. And here is what we see in the U.S. Naval Observatory. And you can go on the Christian website down here, Judah is my Christianity.com. And during this year, as you can see, the 14th day of the first month fell on a Wednesday. And that was Passover. He was resurrected just before sunset on the weekly Sabbath in the afternoon, exactly 72 hours after his burial. On Sunday morning, when the women came at dawn to embalm his body, he was already gone. They did not see the resurrection. They saw an empty tomb and were told by an angel that he had risen just as he said he would. Yeshua came as the Lamb of Elohim to pay the penalty for sin, according to John 1:29. And Paul declared in 1 Corinthians 5:7, "For indeed Messiah, our Passover, was sacrificed for us." A careful study of the Gospel accounts shows that Yeshua and his disciples ate the Passover meal after sunset at the beginning of Abib 14. That would have been a Tuesday night. And you can read that in Mark 14:16-18, Luke 22:13-15, and compare it with Exodus 12:1-8. Later that evening after supper, they went to the Mount of Olives, Mark 14:26. That would have been on a Tuesday night, where soldiers led by Judas Iscariot found and arrested him, verses 43-46. Soon after dawn, the Sanhedrin met to formally charge Yeshua and have him delivered to Pontius Pilate, Mark 15:1. By 9 a.m. that morning, the third hour from daylight in Jewish usage, verse 25, Yeshua, along with two criminals, had been led to a hill on the outskirts of Jerusalem, and he was crucified. From noon till his death, at about 3 p.m., there was complete darkness over the entire area, and you read that in the verses 33-37. Shortly afterwards, Joseph of Arimathea sought an audience with Pilate and requested that Yeshua's dead body be released to him for burial. Verse 43. After summoning the centurion in charge of the executions to ascertain that Yeshua was really dead, Pilate gave Joseph permission to take and to bury the body. That is in Mark 15:44-45. Luke in his Gospel emphasized that the burial was hurried and took place just before sunset. Luke 23:53-54 and John 19:41-42. This emphasis that Yeshua was hurriedly buried shortly before the Sabbath has confused many people into thinking that the crucifixion took place on a Friday. Many readers overlooked John's explanation that this Sabbath was what? It was a high day. John 19:31. This was not a weekly Sabbath. It was an annual high day Sabbath. Remember Abib 15? The day after the Passover was the first holy day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the first of 7 annual holy days commanded to ancient Israel in Leviticus 23:5-7. There were actually 2 Sabbaths that week, an annual holy day on Thursday and the regular weekly Sabbath on a Saturday. Notice Mark's statement. Now when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Salome, bought spices that they might come and anoint him. Mark 16:1. Shops in Jerusalem would have been closed on both the weekly and the annual Sabbath days. Yeshua was buried right before the annual holy day Sabbath began, and the women were present for his burial in Mark 15:47, and their first opportunity to buy and prepare spices would have been on a Friday, when the shops reopened. Note that Luke explains it was after the women prepared the spices and fragrant oils, a job that would have taken hours, that they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. Luke 23:56. How could they have waited until after the Sabbath to buy and prepare spices, as Mark clearly states, yet rest on the weekly Sabbath after they had prepared the spices, as Luke clearly states? Unless there were actually 2 Sabbaths in that week. Understanding this point is a key to understanding the duration of Yeshua's time in the tomb. They returned at the first available opportunity to embalm a dead body on Sunday morning. Luke 24:1. When they arrived on the first day of the week, Yeshua was already gone, and the tomb was open, so that all could see it was empty. Remember, Matthew explained that on the day after the crucifixion, early in the morning of the high day Sabbath, which had to be a Thursday, the Jewish leadership sent a delegation seeking Pilate's permission to post an armed guard to secure the tomb. Pilate authorized them to do so and instructed, "You have a guard, go your way, make it as secure as you know how." Matthew 27:65. The grave of Yeshua was not sealed until the morning of the 15th day of Abib, on the annual Sabbath. In John 19:31 it states that the body of Yeshua needed to be removed from the cross, from the stake, because the Sabbath was about to begin, which was a high day or an annual Sabbath. The guards were witnesses to the events that followed, and were the ones who informed the religious leaders of what actually happened. Matthew 28:11. From the mouth of the very guards that they themselves had posted, these leaders learned that Yeshua had fulfilled the sign of the prophet Jonah, just as he said he would. Here's a summary of what took place during the Passion Week. Tuesday, Yeshua and his disciples ate an evening meal together, and he was arrested during that night. Wednesday, this is the preparation day mentioned in John 19:31, the day before the high Sabbath. Yeshua appears before Pilate and is crucified. He dies about 3 p.m. in the afternoon, before sundown. His body is removed from the stake and placed in the tomb. Thursday, this is the high Sabbath, the first day of unleavened bread. Matthew 27:62. The chief priest met with Pilate, Matthew 27:62-66, to secure a guard. Friday, Yeshua's female followers purchased spices and prepared them. Saturday, that's the weekly Sabbath. All rested and did no work. Yeshua was resurrected sometime in the afternoon before sunset. Sunday, Mary Magdalene by herself, according to the Gospel of John, or with other women according to the Synoptic Gospels, went to the tomb and found it empty. There is one verse, however, which seems to tell us that the Messiah rose on the first day of the week, and that verse is Mark 16:9. It states, "Now when Yeshua was risen early, the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 devils." The text would seem to conclusively prove that Yeshua rose early in the evening on the first day of the week, what we call Saturday night. We need to know that the meaning of a verse may be altered by the addition of a comma or a deletion. The original text did not have these punctuation marks in the Greek text, so they were added later. If a comma is added after risen, the verse takes on an entirely different meaning. Now, when Yeshua was risen, early the first day of the week, see, after risen, comma. Now, when Yeshua was risen, comma, early the first day of the week, comma, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 devils. Mark 16:9. The change is not altering the scripture, since it was not written with punctuation mark. This makes the verse consistent with all the 4 Gospels. When Mary Magdalene visited the grave shortly after the Sabbath ended and saw the empty grave with a stone rolled away, but did not see an angel or see Yeshua. It was later, when the sun had risen on Sunday morning, that she came with Mary, the mother of James and Salome, back to the tomb, saw an angel who told her that he had risen, and then saw Yeshua himself. Yeshua rose from the dead late on the weekly Sabbath. He revealed himself to Mary Magdalene and the disciples on the first day of the week, shortly after sunrise. Yeshua performed the sign he said he would. And that Sunday, being the Lord's Day, is a fabrication of the Bishop of Rome. Bishop Sixtus instituted this teaching at Rome shortly after the death of the Apostle John. So is Sunday the Lord's Day? Under no circumstances. Later bishops of Rome perpetuated the error he brought into the church. In due time, even the keeping of the Passover remembrance on the evening 24 hours after the last Sabbath was outlawed with excommunication. It was Bishop Sixtus, the name is also spelled as Sixtus, who was the first recorded individual to prevent the proper observance of the Passover and to celebrate the sacred mysteries only on a Sunday. Irenaeus speaks further of him, declaring that his doctrine was in direct opposition to the practice of the remainder of the churches. Bishop Sixtus was living at the beginning of the 2nd century, just after the Apostle John died. Notice too that Easter Sunday did not begin with Peter or Paul in the 60s of the Common Era, but with Sixtus in the 2nd century. Here you have the astounding origin of Easter Sunday in the Western churches. Together with this practice, the sacred mysteries were also observed every Sunday. And you can find that under this website here, climbthewall.com. Here's another question. Why didn't the two Marys try to anoint the body of Yeshua on Friday, since they had prepared the spices and perfumes on Friday before the weekly Sabbath began? You know why? It is because in Matthew 27, 62 to 66, Pilate had given the order to have the grave sealed on Thursday morning. And they had put the Roman seal on it and posted guards until the 3 days were complete. A contradiction? After 3 days or on the 3rd day? In today's understanding, there could be a big difference between the term after 3 days or on the 3rd day. Because the 3rd day could mean the day after tomorrow. Depends on when you start counting. But the question is, which is it? There are two basic sets of explanation as to when Yeshua died and rose again. The casual reader will find a contradiction between these two explanations, but the problems disappear when we take into account the audiences addressed. Was he resurrected after 3 days or on the 3rd day? Which one is it? It's a very good question. There are two ways to look at it. The answer could depend upon the audience. If you understand things as a 1st century Jew, then the answer is after 3 days. If you understand things as a 1st century Gentile or a modern American, then the answer is on the 3rd day. Every language and culture has its figures of speech, or called idioms. Idiomatic expressions in other cultures don't have to make any sense to us at all. Our job as readers of the literature from another culture is to try to understand their idioms, their expressions, rather than judge them or to put our own interpretations on them. Some people claim to carry a fever. Do they carry it in a bag, box, or a purse? Why would we fix a meal? Is the meal broken? The Hebrew had their own way to express duration. To the Jew, after 3 days meant on the 3rd day. Here are a few examples from the Bible. In Genesis 42:16, and he put them all in custody for 3 days. On the 3rd day, Joseph said to them, "Do this, and you will live, for I fear God." And they are released on that day. From the context of verses 25 to 26. In this case, the 4th 3 days meant only into the 3rd day. 1 Kings 20:29 from the NIV. For 7 days they camped opposite each other, and on the 7th day the battle was joined. 2 Chronicles 10:5 and 12 from the ASV. And he said unto them, Come again unto me after 3 days. And the people departed. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Jeroboam the 3rd day, as the king bade, saying, Come to me again the 3rd day. Here is one New Testament passage that indicates this Jewish idiom. Matthew 27:63. Sir, they said, we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, After 3 days I will rise again. 64. So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day. Do you see the difference? Note that after 3 days was somehow equivalent to until the 3rd day, not until the 4th day. Another way to harmonize the two phrases after 3 days and 3rd day is what starting point is being used for counting to the 3rd day. Matthew 17:23 says, And they shall kill him, and the 3rd day he shall be raised again. Is the starting point when they have killed him or when they are killing him? The starting is therefore debatable. Mark 9:31, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of men, and they shall kill him, and after that he is killed, he shall rise the 3rd day. From this text we have a clear starting point, after he is killed. The sundown starts the next day, so we may assuredly determine that this text is counting the days from the beginning of the day in the evening after the crucifixion. Luke 9:22, the Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected of the elders, and chief priests, and scribes, and be slain, and be raised the 3rd day. The text seems to suggest that he will be raised the 3rd day after being killed. Yeshua was slain on a Wednesday, then Thursday would be the 1st day, Friday the 2nd day, and Sabbath the 3rd day, the day he was resurrected. That would harmonize with the phrase, after 3 days. So what about Luke 24:21? But we trusted that he had been he which should have redeemed Israel. And besides all this, today is the 3rd day, since these things were done. That verse used to confuse me, personally. So since means away from or after. Moffat translation says, but he is dead, and that is 3 days ago. We have the New Berkeley version. It says, moreover, 3 days have already passed since all these events occurred. Then we have the Syriac New Testament, and lo, 3 days have passed, all these things occurred, or since all these things occurred. The scripture do not contradict themselves. In other words, these phrases, after 3 days, the 3rd day, and even 3 days and 3 nights, all mean exactly, basically, the same thing. In order to get to the truth of any event, my friends, to find out exactly what took place, we must consider every aspect and all available information. Maybe now is the time to ask another question. If the first followers of Yeshua for the first 3 centuries did not celebrate the death of the Messiah on Friday, but on the 14th day of the first Jewish month, why was it changed? In order to celebrate his death on a Friday every year, and his resurrection on a Sunday. What could be the real reason? Who could be behind these changes? Who's really being worshipped and honored? Would that be a good question? We are told that Yeshua died on Good Friday, but this was Dagon's day. Ever wonder why people eat fish on this day? Tammuz celebration. Greece had what we may call its Good Friday and Easter Sunday long before the events took place in Christianity. That's according to Fraser, The Golden Bow, 733. Taken altogether, the coincidence of the Christian with the heathen festivals are too close and too numerous to be accidental. That's again from Fraser, Adonis, Attis, Osiris, 1:310. Nothing sums up the meaning of the Christian Good Friday like Michelangelo's gorgeous sculpture of Mary grieving over her crucified son. Perhaps without even realizing it, the artist who created these images were restoring the Queen of Heaven to one of her oldest roles, that of the one who sheds tears over the loss of the dying God who will conquer death. This is a very old motive, far older than Christianity. So here the Queen of Heaven mourns her loss. Before Mary and Jesus entered the roles, Isis wept in Egypt over the broken pieces of husband. Osiris, whose subsequent rebirth from death was aided by her reassembly of the pieces of his corpse, and whose presence in the afterlife helped assure Egyptians that they too would live beyond death. In the Near East, the dying and reborn god of Tammuz, who was worshipped well beyond the borders of his original Mesopotamian homeland. The Bible reports that even the women of Israel were mourning for the dying god Tammuz in the time of the prophet Ezekiel, just before Babylon conquered Judah and took over the holy city of Jerusalem. And you find this under this website down here, thequeenofheaven.wordpress.com. Weeping for Tammuz. Here we read in Easter, Its Story and Meaning, page 58, by Alan Watts. The son of Semiramis was called Tammuz. At age 40, he was killed by a wild boar in the spring of the year. A Lent of 40 days was set aside by Babylonian Ishtar worshippers to weep for him. The crucifixion in Babylon. The Babylonian account of the crucifixion goes like this. Ishtar had her divine son Tammuz crucified, buried, and then resurrected. And at the crucifixion, Ishtar stood at the cross beside. That's from Graham's Deceptions and Myth of the Bible, page 348. In many mythicist writings, the ancient Phrygo-Roman god Attis is depicted as having been born of a virgin mother on December 25th, being killed and resurrected afterwards. The parallel, albeit at a superficial level, between this myth and the account of the resurrection of Christ is absolutely clear. Read that under www.truthbeknown.com. Phrygian crucifixion. The Phrygian celebration of the crucifixion is described as follows. A pine tree was cut in the woods and brought into the temple of Cybele. It was treated almost as a divinity, was decked with violets, and the effigy of a young man tied to the stem, like the crucifixion. It was followed by the Day of Blood. The high priest first drew blood from his own arms, and then the others gashed and slashed themselves. See 1 Kings 18:28, and spattered the altar and the sacred tree with blood. The effigy was afterwards laid in a tomb, but when night fell, sorrow was turned to joy. A light was brought, and the tomb was found to be empty. The next day was a festival of the resurrection, and ended in carnival and license, the Hilaria, including a sacramental meal and the baptism of blood. That's from Fraser's Golden Bow, page 229. The victim was crucified, and then his flesh was eaten and his blood drunk by priests of Baal, known as cannibals. That's Tertullian, Apologetics 9, Horace Epod 5, and so on. Pliny praises the Roman people for having put an end to those monstrous rites, in which to murder a man was to do an act of the greatest devoutness, and to eat his flesh was to secure the highest blessing of health. Natural History 30.4. James Prescott relates how the Spanish missionaries, when they first arrived in Mexico, found crosses worshipped in temples. Their surprise was heightened when they witnessed a religious rite which reminded them of Christian communion. The communion in the form of the Aztec sun god deity was made of the flour of maize mixed with blood, and after consecration by the priest was distributed among the people, who, as they ate it, showed signs of humiliation and sorrow, declaring it was the flesh of the deity. This is from the History of the Conquest of Mexico, 3.369. In fact, the scarecrow is one custom that came from a pre-Christian crucified Savior, whom the Romans called Priapus, and has been the fertility god of gardens for millennia. Their idols are like scarecrows in a cucumber field, and they cannot speak. They have to be carried, for they cannot walk. Jeremiah 10:5. Do we have a different Messiah? Yeshua wasn't resurrected on Easter Sunday, Matthew 28:1, or crucified on Good Friday. It was Tammuz, a Babylonian and Assyrian god, who died and rose annually with dying and reviving vegetation. That gave birth to a counterfeit Christianity. That's the Encyclopedia Britannica, 14th edition. So what's the big thing about Friday? Because Christianity today is Tammuz worship, pure and unadulterated. And Friday is the day of Tammuz death. Easter sunrise celebrates his resurrection. It has been since ancient Babylon. The proof of Messiah's authenticity, 100% clear. Daniel 9:27b, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice, the sanctuary sacrificial offering, and the oblations, the cereal and drink offering, to cease. Midst literal means middle. Count it out. Night 1, Wednesday. Day 1, Thursday, unleavened bread. Night 2, Thursday. Day 2, Friday. Night 3, Friday. Day 3, Sabbath. Messiah is cut off exactly in the midst of the week, according to Daniel 9:27. Here is some historical data. Around the year 200, a document purporting to pass on apostolic instruction called the Didascalia Apostolorum mentions that the Last Supper of Jesus Christ and his disciples was on a Tuesday night. It should be noted that the timing mentioned in the document corresponds to the biblical method of counting time. The week started with Sunday as the first day, and the days began at sunset. This document states, "For when we had eaten the Last Supper, on the third day of the week, at even, meaning Tuesday evening, we went forth to the Mount of Olives, and in the night they seized our Lord Jesus, and the next day, which was the fourth of the week, Wednesday." Did you realize that there have been many noted believers in a Wednesday crucifixion? From the time of the early church until now, these include Epiphanes, Victorinus of Petar in 307 AD, Lactantius, Westcott, Cassiodorus, Gregory of Tours, later Finis, Dake, and R.A. Torre. The Bible teaches a Wednesday crucifixion. So each one must face the facts of the Bible as compared to the traditions of men. At the same time, we should say that this does not determine salvation. We are not saying that. Superficial reading of the Gospel does not tend to lead one to the conclusion of a Friday crucifixion, however, when read separately. So one cannot blame the majority of believers for this false belief. Someone might say that the Passover as kept today cannot fall on a Wednesday in the Jewish calendar. That is the case today. But then neither does first fruits, wave offering, or the Feast of Weeks, Pentecost, occur on the first day of the week in the Jewish calendar. The reason is a matter of history. There was a controversy between the Pharisee and the Sadducean way of keeping these important feast days. At the time of Yeshua, the Sadducees were the high priests and kept the days according to our present Christian understanding from the Torah. For example, the Sadducees believed that first fruits always fell on the first day of the week, which meant that Pentecost also fell on the first day of the week. While the Pharisees believed that first fruits fell on the 16th of Abib, the day after the annual Sabbath, leading to Pentecost on various days of the week, but it would always fall on the 6th day of the third month. If that is true, when you think about it, then that would make the counting of the Omer unnecessary, as Pentecost would always fall on the 6th day of the third month. At the time of Yeshua, the Sadducean keeping of the feast was in effect, but after the dispersion, the more numerous and stricter Pharisees perpetuated the understanding of Judaism. Again, the question: what was the only sign giving? The scripture states in Matthew 12:38-40, then certain of the scribes and of the Pharisees answered, saying, Master, we would see a sign from you. But he answered and said unto them, an evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given to it, but the sign of the prophet Jonah. As Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Matthew 12:38-40. So we have a choice. Believe it or not. As I have mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, the topic about the Wednesday crucifixion and the Sabbath resurrection may not affect our salvation, but it does answer the question on whether Yeshua kept his word and if he was truly the promised Messiah.